When you begin working in a school library, your school district most likely is going to give you guidelines and even rules about how to develop your collection. But very rarely does anyone ever show you how to weed your collection. And today I'm going to give you some tips and ideas that will help make weeding your school library easy. Let's go. Okay, so let's be honest. Weeding, for a lot of reasons, isn't always easy. And I think the biggest reason for librarians that makes weeding difficult is that we love books. So to pull out a book and discard the book from your collection is always a challenge. Getting past that emotional part of disconnecting yourself from that book is the hardest part about weeding. What you have to do to make that emotional disconnect easier is always focus on two questions when you're weeding. Number one, does this book support the curriculum of my school? And number two, does this book reflect the reading interests of my students and will it get them excited to read? So those are the two questions that make weeding much easier and take that emotional component out of it. The answer has to be yes to one of those two questions in order for you to keep the book. When I'm weeding in a casual way, maybe I'm reshelving, I'm organizing the books, or I'm doing my inventory. If I'm looking at a book and wondering whether I should weed it from the collection or not, one of the first things I'm going to do is open up the book, look at the copyright date. Is this book 3 years old, 5 years old, 20 years old? And that will help me determine the value of the book. And not every older book is necessarily not valuable, but it depends on the topic of the book. We're talking nonfiction here, but a lot of books can be outdated within a couple of years and no longer relevant. And so if you find that right away, then that would be an easy book to weed. But if you're in the nonfiction section and you find a book on Greek mythology, well, if it's a 20-year-old book, then age isn't going to impact your decision. What might impact your decision is, are the pictures in color? You might have books in your collection that are so old, they were still printing the pages in black and white. There might be so much text on the page without chapters or headings or captions or photographs that it would overwhelm you to read. It's certainly going to overwhelm your students to read. Books that have tiny little texts, all black and white, obviously, that's going to be a book that you would pull. So even if the information may still be correct, it's just going to be so difficult for your students, and no student is going to be checking out that book or wanting to read it. If you are weeding your book in a more intentional way, because maybe you're doing your inventory, or maybe you just need more room on the shelves and you want to weed out the older stuff, the things that nobody's checking out anymore, one of the things that you can do is run a report in your library circulation system. The system that I'm familiar with is Follett Destiny, and in Destiny I was able to run different types of reports. One was the age of the collection, and I could do that by sections. So I could run the age of my collection from the 500s or the 300s or the 900s. And so that was helpful to do a small section at a time. Also, you could run a report by circulation. How many times has this book been checked out in the last 10 years? So I could run a report that says, give me a list of every book that hasn't been checked out in the past 10 years. How I would use that report, this is helpful for fiction. If you have a collection of books that have not been checked out in 10 years or 5 years or more, that is a useful report to run for your fiction, because sometimes in nonfiction, it's a lot easier if the book is older, if the information is outdated. It's easier to decide to weed out the nonfiction, but the fiction is often harder. So circulation statistics are a good way to decide what needs to be weeded and what doesn't. It also gives you a little insight. Once you realize what hasn't been checked out, before you just automatically weed it, you have to ask yourself, why hasn't this been checked out? Maybe it's a series that nobody's interested in. Maybe it's where it's shelved and so the students haven't noticed it. If you are familiar with those books and you know them to be genuinely good books, maybe you are going to market those books a little to your students to see if the interest is there before you decide to weed it. In the fiction section, also the age reports are helpful too. You might have a series of books that is from the 1970s or the 1980s, and when you look at the books, the hair, the clothing is so outdated, the way the text is typed into the page might be a reason why the students aren't checking out that book. It might seem just like the nonfiction. It just might be too difficult for your students to read, and so they're just turned off by it. Some of the books that are older, also, sometimes they might have politically incorrect type of material in there. There are certain things, words that we wouldn't use anymore, and language, the style of the language that's just outdated. And those would be books that you would weed from your library as well. Now, some of the library systems, they will give you recommendations about how aged your collection should be, especially in the nonfiction section. Like they may say you shouldn't have a science book that's copyrighted longer than 5 years ago. Well, that's nice, but it's not realistic in a public school library budget. Often you don't have the funds to replace books with newer copies. By subtracting from your collection, you are updating the age of the collection. I know in my elementary school library, when I worked there, one of the librarians, not the one before me, but the one before her, had been in that library for 30 years. And that was after she retired as an academic librarian of 25 years. And then she spent her career working another 30 years, but in elementary school. So a big shift for her. But the collection itself really reflected her and her academic experience. So there were some books in there that were really beyond an elementary school level, that were beautiful old books, but they just didn't belong in an elementary school library. And so that brings me back to those two important questions. Does this support the curriculum? And does this reflect the reading interests of my students? At the end of the day, that is really the bottom line, those two questions. When I'm waiting, I will pull a book off the shelf. I will open it up. The very first thing is this book smelly? Is it moldy? Is it mildewy? That is a question you're going to ask yourself. Then I'm going to look at the copyright date, see how old the book is. I'm going to look at the condition of the book. You know, the pink juice books, well, those are easy to throw out. You don't have to think about it. But sometimes, you know, it's borderline. You're borderline in the sense you're not sure whether to keep it or toss it. And always ask yourself those two questions and you can't go wrong. So as difficult as it is, try to take that emotional component out of weeding. Just ask yourself those two questions. Does this book support the curriculum? Does this book reflect the reading interests of my students? And that will help you decide. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please like and subscribe. See you next time.